Right now, literally right now, while you're watching this, there's a tax on your groceries, your clothes, your laptop, and your coffee that you never voted for, never signed up for, and probably can't even name. And it's costing your household roughly $100 a month that just vanishes. No line item, no notification, no receipt. By the time most people notice, they've already lost over $1,000. Let me show you exactly where it's going. Here's what most people think when they hear the word tariff. They think trade war stuff, big geopolitical chess game. Doesn't really affect me personally. And I get it. Tariff sounds like a word that belongs in a press conference, not in your kitchen. But here's the thing. Tariffs don't land on countries. They land on cargo containers. And those cargo containers are full of the stuff you actually buy every week. The New York Federal Reserve published a study in February 2026, and the finding was blunt. Nearly 90% of tariff costs are being paid by American businesses and consumers, not the foreign exporter, not the country we're punishing. You, your wallet, your grocery run on Tuesday. My name is Ashton, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time tracing how a policy change in Washington ends up as an extra $4.50 on a bag of coffee beans in your pantry. If you're someone who has felt like your paycheck buys a little less every month and you can't quite figure out why, subscribe and stick around, because this one is going to connect some dots that nobody's connecting for you. So here's how I think about this. The reason tariffs drain your wallet without you noticing isn't one thing. It's a pipeline, a chain reaction with 3 stages, each one harder to see than the last. I call them the 3 invisible markups. Markup 1, the gate tax, what happens at the border. Markup 2, the supply chain squeeze, what happens before it reaches the shelf. Markup 3, the domestic copycat, what happens to stuff that was never even imported. Most people, and I mean most, never get past the first one. They hear tariff and they think it's a border thing. The second markup is where your budget actually starts bleeding. And the third one? The third one is the one that's going to genuinely irritate you. Let's walk through each. Okay, so the most basic version of this, the one everyone sort of understands, is that when the US puts a tariff on imports, it's basically a tax charged at the border. A container of electronics from China arrives at the port. Before it goes anywhere, the importer pays a percentage on top of the sticker price. In 2025, the average tariff rate on US imports went from 2.6% to about 13%. That's a 5-fold increase in under 12 months. Now here's where your brain does something sneaky. You hear 13% and you think, okay, that's annoying, but it's not catastrophic. 13%, that's like a slightly aggressive sales tax, manageable. And that right there is the trap. Your brain grabs the most visible number on the headline and uses it as a stand-in for the entire financial picture. Because that one number feels survivable, your internal threat detector files the whole situation under "we're fine." Meanwhile, the real damage is stacking up in places you aren't looking. Let me do the math that nobody does. Harvard economists tracking real-time barcode data found that retail prices on imported goods are up about 6 percentage points because of tariffs. For apparel, your shirts, jackets, basics, it's nearly 9 points. Coffee and tea, 7.5. Now, multiply that across everything your household imports, which is a lot more than you think, and you get about $1,000 that vanished from the average household in 2025 alone. Projected 2026 cost? Around $1,300. Some estimates run even higher. You didn't get a bill, you didn't get a notification, it just costs more now. A little here, a little there. And because it's spread across 50 different purchases a month, your brain never flags any single one as a problem. You just feel a little more broke and you're not sure why. But that's just what you can see. The part that actually squeezes your budget is the next markup. Here's what most people completely miss. The tariff at the border is just the first domino. Think of it like this. A tariff is a rock dropped in a pond. The splash is the price increase on the import itself. But the ripples? The ripples are the real story. When an importer pays 13% more for a shipment, they don't just shrug and eat the cost. They pass a portion of it along to the distributor. The distributor passes it to the retailer. The retailer passes it to you. And at every single handoff, each company adds their own margin on top. They're not charities. They have rent, payroll, shareholders. So a tariff that started at 13% at the border doesn't arrive at the shelf as a 13% price increase. It arrives as something bigger because it's been marked up at every stage of the chain. The Federal Reserve actually tracked this. A Fed's note published in March 2026 used barcode-level consumer data from 200,000 U.S. households, and the finding was blunt. Retail prices on Chinese imports climbed 8.5% year over year by December 2025. And here's the kicker. The price increases didn't even start showing up at the register until April, 5 months of lag. The tariffs were announced, and for months, everything looked fine. Then the wave hit. That delay is dangerous. It's like eating something that makes you sick 6 hours later. You never blame the right meal. You blame whatever's in front of you. Now, say someone has $200 of breathing room in their monthly budget. Pretty typical. Then grocery prices drift up 5 to 7%. That's an extra $40 to $55 a month on food alone. Their kid needs a new laptop for school, and the Consumer Technology Association says laptops could jump over 30% under current tariff proposals. New clothes for the season? Apparel is up nearly 9 points. Suddenly, that $200 cushion isn't a cushion anymore. It's a rounding error. And if that sounds bad, the next markup is where things get genuinely uncomfortable. This is the one that makes people's heads tilt when I explain it. Because Markup 3 isn't about imported goods at all. It's about domestic goods raising their prices too. Here's the pattern. When you slap a 50% tariff on imported steel, which is what happened, foreign steel becomes dramatically more expensive. That makes domestic steel look cheaper by comparison. Great, right? That's the point. Except domestic steel producers aren't stupid. They look at the new import price, they look at their own price, and they think, why am I charging $800 a ton when the imported stuff is now $1,200? I'll charge $1,100. Still cheaper than the import, still more than I was charging before. And they do exactly that. This is precisely what happened during the first round of steel tariffs. Both imported and domestic prices went up. The Harvard barcode data confirmed this is happening broadly. Domestic goods prices are up 4.3 percentage points, even though there's no tariff on them. 4.3% on things that were never imported, things made right here. This is exactly what happened in 1930 with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. They raised tariffs on over 20,000 goods. The initial promise was protection, save American jobs, support American industry. What actually happened? Prices climbed, trading partners retaliated, imports dropped by 2/3 in 3 years. It didn't cause the Great Depression, but most historians agree it made it significantly worse. Now, I'm not saying we're heading for a depression. I'm saying the pattern, protect through tariffs, trigger a price cascade, watch domestic prices ride the wave up, is not new. We've seen this movie, and it doesn't end with a cheaper grocery bill. Here's the behavioral trap. You see a domestic product sitting next to a more expensive import, and your brain says, good deal. You feel like you're making a smart choice, but you're comparing against an artificially inflated price. The deal you're getting is worse than what you had 6 months ago. You're anchoring to the wrong number. Let me show you the contrast. 2 people, same income, same city. Person A sees prices rising and thinks, everything's more expensive, nothing I can do. They keep buying the same brands, the same way, at the same stores. Person B notices the same price shifts and thinks, something changed. Where exactly is this coming from, and what can I adjust? 12 months later, person A has burned through their emergency savings. Person B is annoyed but stable.
Same economy, same tariffs, very different outcome. And the difference isn't income, it's awareness. Can I be honest about something? The reason this topic matters isn't really about tariffs. Tariffs are just the current version of the same problem. The real problem is that most people's finances are built to survive normal conditions. And the moment something shifts, tariffs, inflation, an interest rate hike, whatever, there's no buffer, no margin, no slack in the system. And the people who get wrecked by this aren't the people who know the least about tariffs. They're the people who feel the pain and look away. Psychologists call it the ostrich effect. When things feel financially threatening, a huge percentage of people literally stop checking their bank accounts, stop opening the credit card statement, stop doing the math, because not knowing feels safer than knowing. In the short term, it is safer. Your cortisol drops, your anxiety dips, and your budget quietly bleeds out while you're not looking. When you have a $3,000 emergency fund, a $1,300 tariff hit is annoying. You recalibrate, you adjust. When you don't have that cushion, a $1,300 hit becomes a credit card balance, which becomes an interest charge, which becomes a hole you're digging out of for 2 years. Same external event, completely different life experience. I want you to think of the goal here not as beating tariffs. You can't control trade policy. The goal is what I call the pricing shield, having enough awareness, flexibility, and cushion in your budget that when the next invisible cost shows up, and it will, you absorb it instead of being absorbed by it. So what do you actually do about this? Because understanding the pipeline, the gate tax, the supply chain squeeze, the domestic copycat, that's the first half. The part that actually changes your financial life is what comes next. I've got 3 moves. They're not sexy, they're not complicated, they work. Step 1, the origin audit. 10 minutes, once. Here's what you do. Pull up your last 3 bank or credit card statements. Pick the 10 things you spend the most on each month that aren't rent or utilities. For each one, ask, where does this come from? You don't need to become a trade policy expert. You just need to know which of your regular purchases are import heavy. Electronics, almost entirely imported. Coffee, largely imported. Clothing basics, heavily imported. Fresh produce, depends on the season. Winter produce in the US is often from Mexico, Chile, and Central America. Once you see which of your spending habits are sitting in the tariff blast zone, you can make targeted swaps instead of panicking about everything. The Consumer Technology Association estimated laptops and tablets could see 34% price increases, smartphones 31%. If you were already planning a tech upgrade, that's where you focus, not everywhere at once. Why it works? You stop fighting an invisible enemy and start seeing the actual map. What it prevents? Bleeding money on tariff-inflated items when comparable alternatives exist. Step 2. The substitution stack. Ongoing, 5 minutes per shopping trip. I know this sounds tedious. It works anyway. For every import-heavy item on your regular buy list, identify one domestic or less tariffed alternative. Not for everything, just for the big-ticket repeats. Here's the trick. You don't have to go cheap. You have to go lateral. A different brand of coffee sourced from Colombia instead of a blend routed through a higher tariff supply chain. Store brand basics instead of name brand imports in apparel. A refurbished laptop instead of a new one at a 30% markup. This isn't about deprivation. It's about refusing to pay a hidden tax when a nearly identical option exists without it. Keep a running list in your phone's notes app. Call it the no markup list. Yeah, it's a dorky name. It saves you money every single week. Why it works? Status quo bias keeps you buying the same things out of habit, even when the price has silently jumped. A substitution list breaks the autopilot. What it prevents? Paying the domestic copycat markup on goods where cheaper, equivalent alternatives exist. Still with me? Good, because this last one is the one that actually compounds. Step 3. The tariff buffer. Set it and forget it. Open a separate savings bucket, a sub-account, a digital envelope, whatever your bank offers, and label it something that makes you actually remember it exists. I suggest the Invisible Tax Fund, or the government is charging me for stuff I already bought fund. Whatever sticks. Put $25 to $75 per paycheck into it, automatically. Don't think about it. Here's why. The Yale Budget Lab estimates put the 2026 per household tariff cost in the range of $1,300 to $2,400, depending on which tariff structures hold. At $50 per paycheck, bi-weekly, you've got $1,300 by year's end. You've literally pre-funded the tariff hit. When prices rise, and they will keep rising through 2026, you're not scrambling, you're pulling from a fund that was built for exactly this. Why it works? Present bias makes us treat future costs as someone else's problem. Automating the savings removes the decision point entirely. What it prevents, the slow erosion of your emergency fund, or the worst case, the slow accumulation of credit card debt from 1,000 tiny overcharges. Look, this video isn't really about tariffs. Tariffs are just the current version of an invisible cost. Before this, it was supply chain disruptions. Before that, it was inflation nobody wanted to talk about. Before that, it was fees buried in your phone bill. The pattern is always the same. A cost gets introduced somewhere upstream, it trickles down through a system you can't see, and it arrives in your life as a vaguely uncomfortable feeling that things cost more than they should. The difference between people who stay financially stable through these shifts and people who slowly sink isn't intelligence, it's not income. It's whether they built their budget for the world they actually live in or the world they wish they lived in. You don't need to become a trade policy expert. You don't need to predict what Congress does next or which tariff rate changes in July. You just need to know where the invisible costs are landing in your life, build a small buffer against them, and stop buying on autopilot when the price tags have quietly been rewritten. That's not financial mastery, that's financial self-defense. And honestly, that's how you stop waking up wondering where your money went. Real question for you. Tell me in the comments, when was the last time you compared prices on something you buy regularly and thought, wait, when did this get this expensive? Name the item, because if you can name it, that's your starting point for step 1. If this changed how you think about what's happening to your budget, subscribe. I put one of these out every week, and the next one is about the 3 numbers on your paycheck that most people have never actually calculated. It's a similar hiding in plain sight situation, and it's going to bother you. I'm Ashton. It's way too late, and I'm still reading about trade policy. I'll see you in the next one.